ability to produce, its ability to employ, and likewise the market loses its ability to sustain normal consumption, or what would be unimpeded consumption, if we consider that normal, as I would, unimpeded consumption of just consumption of production. So that's a problem. Another thing that he said was that he considered Douglas to have presented a workable solution. But note that he doesn't even refer to how that could be so. Now, you might think that, that this is the way that diligent people always discuss things with each other. But I'm sorry. If you designed airplanes, for instance, and a fellow said that, he was working on a concept where airfoils were actually inverted, and the plane had never flown, and there was no reason, either offered or deducible, why that should be the case, that an inverted airfoil would work somehow better. Obviously, this isn't the way that we would effectively communicate with each other. So whenever a controversial or adversarial or opposing or alternate proposition is offered, credibility demands that we explain how it could be a solution. And there's not a word of this, So that's what I'm noting. First of all, I see that the math, that he's claiming to be a miracle is totally impertinent. There isn't a displacement of jobs at this constant rate, escalating with the rate of indebtedness, as he says. It doesn't exist. Therefore the math can't be right, and that's all there is to it. People think math is some kind of mysterious discipline, and it's not. It's the simple accounting. You remember all the word problems we had in the first grade, in the second grade, elementary math. They were elementary math. If Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water, and on the way down, every time they took a step, a thimbleful sloshed out somehow, even though the bucket was emptying, But if somehow this happened and there was, 5,000 thimblefuls of water in the bucket, and it was 1,000 steps to the house where they were going with the bucket, how much of the bucket would be left? That's math. It's just all the things that we regularly do in life. All of us use it. All of us use it in elementary ways. This does not mean that we're unqualified. A carpenter lays out a wall. He can't afford to make an error because it wastes materials. It wastes time. It makes the house... It may not make the house cost more, but it makes the house cost more to the person who produces it, reducing their reward for their work because, rightly, they're not being paid for the work they did wrong. So we all have to do math. We all have to estimate things, and the truth is that the units of estimation are mathematic, and the processes that we go through, however approximate, are mathematical. And we need to appreciate this, not to discredit ourselves as mathematicians, because all we're asking is that we come up with accountable explanations of economy here, a way of sustaining our commerce. And in truth, all this is about whether or not our right to conduct commerce amongst each other, amongst ourselves, should be impeded to an ever greater degree by exploitation, which dispossesses us not only in the end of all our production, but even of the ability to produce, of our means of production. So anyway, Zeitgeist gives no good account of this process because they're plagiarists. They've merely found this work on the internet. They've asked questions. They've asked exhaustive questions to the only person that can answer them. They may have taken answers they better understood even than their explanations might intimate, but they reduce them down for the public to answers which don't suffice to explain all these issues to us. Nonetheless, the math that he's just cited is not only wrong, it's irrelevant. It's wrong because that isn't the process. As the debt escalates, we don't lose our jobs right away. We merely have to borrow more. In the beginning of the lifespan, it's little more. We don't notice it. But as debt begins to escalate by ever greater degrees, suddenly it becomes noticeable. Down the road from that, it becomes worrisome. Down the road from that, not very far, it becomes very worrisome. And as it inherently escalates at an ever greater rate, it becomes extremely worrisome. If you're not worried now, you're asleep at the wheel. But the thing is, we don't lose jobs at a like rate all the while, nor is his equation the way to calculate what amount of the circulation we are deprived of which would sustain jobs. You see, jobs even, we know that for a fact, and on the very most basic terms, because wages for one kind of a job are not equal to the wages for another, as another, as another, as another. Nor is the importance of certain production equal to any other kind of production. In the end, what tends to be left is the things that we most need merely to survive, rightly, because those are the only things we consume. That's the last thing we can afford, to consume, because we don't spend anything else on anything else but our survival. So, being as those jobs might, under initial conditions, particularly in later conditions later, warrant different wages, not just by demand, but ability to afford to persist in paying for production. You see, a person can't just say, well, so many jobs will disappear as relates to interest. So we know this on every conceivable grounds, and critical thinkers therefore would give no sway to this proposition of a purportedly miracle equation.
They got to the first half of the P over P plus I equation, but they didn't get to the remainder. What does that represent? The guys who get knocked out.
I disagree with your equation, but we can take that up in a
No. If you want to disagree with the equation, you take it up at Let's SC, because other people can argue with you too.
Oh well, I don't.
I'm sorry. What is it about the Zeitgeist equation?
Well,
P plus I.
See, they got the equation from me, okay? But they're citing it in some way, which I don't even know, because I wouldn't bother listening.
Well, I understood how they cited it, and I approved.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is owed is P plus I, and
what you got is P.
What's in circulation is P. But
so how many guys are going to survive? P out of P plus I.
Well,
how many guys get knocked out of the game?
Well, it's not even that simple, actually. The P, the C, it should be, equals P, isn't true. For instance,
what's C?
Circulation.
Oh no, we're not talking volume here.
This is very hard for the listener to follow with all of his customary interruptions. So I'm going to clarify something here. What I'm trying to explain to him is that P plus I is actually what the new sum of debt equals to. In other words, debt 1 equals debt 1 plus I, or debt 2 equals, debt 1 in principal, which is expressed in principal, equals the principal plus interest. But the principal is what's introduced to circulation. It is not what is in circulation. And that's what I'm trying at several different junctures here to inject into this discussion, which further makes his mathematic equation awry. The fact of the matter is, and you'll notice this, profusely in my expressions, of remaining principal. So the circulation, what remains in circulation, is a result of what we've borrowed into circulation, P, minus what we've paid out of it in the way of P plus I, and have or have not borrowed back into circulation as new P, increased above the former P so much as I. Notice I also said so much as I, accounting for G. Edward Griffin's preposterous objection that we could work for banks. Well, there's a number of processes by which some interest over principal returns to circulation without it having to be borrowed back into circulation. And those means or vehicles for it returning are negligible. But I've always accounted for them. Another one, which Griffin doesn't even mention, is bankruptcy. Why didn't he mention it? Because it lends to an understanding that of the obfuscation of the currency. Because when we mention that, well, some money stays in circulation because of bankruptcy, you have to think, unless you're brain dead, why? Why is that a benefit to us, that we would have to, suffer bankruptcy? Well, the truth of the matter is, we're just accounting for the different ways that money might come back into circulation to, for some while, sustain a vital circulation. But the circulation does not equal P, and we all know that. If it did equal P, there would be the principal, remaining principal, in circulation right now, and it's it's a tiny fraction of that. It's a tiny fraction of that. We can see that just think about everyone around you and imagine the debt they owe. The debt, quote, debt, unquote, is the principal that they owe. And that's a purpose misstatement of the banking system as well, because what we really owe is the total obligation, which is the interest and the principal. But what we call debt, which is the principal, is the principal. And so, if the circulation equaled the principal, each and every one of us, everywhere around ourselves, would in general possess so much as we owe. That is, I might not possess it, but you would, because whatever I bought by assuming a debt, you had produced, you see. But if the circulation equaled the principal, so much as all that we owe, the debt, the principal, would be in circulation. And of course, nothing but a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that is actually in circulation. So we should notice that this statement is tremendously awry, but he keeps interrupting me and he keeps trying to assert that it is, and I'm trying to tell him there's something wrong with his equation. I really want to take it up in a frank and candid manner, surprising him in a later discussion, so I really don't want to argue it at the time. But I thought it be polite at least to challenge him and feel him out and see, what he had to argue with here. And so that's what you're really experiencing is in his answer, or let's say more so his interruptions preventing me from really getting at it. He's just saying it's right somehow. He's saying it's right. But we all know by comparing how much money is in circulation to what we owe that, sorry, principle is not in circulation. Some of it is. Only some of it.
We're not talking velocity of money here. We're
No.
talking only